That's my mum's old biscuit tin from the 1940s, 1950s. Every figure that I owned in the 1970s that I took with me to college fitted in there. Got some Urukai, and I've got an orc. Oh, I've got a single wolf rider and some hobgoblins. Haradrim. I had 2 Haradrim. That was it. That's what I had. We tended to get figures in 1s and 2s. If you wanted to order a lot of figures, the only real way to do it was to get the company catalogue, which you had to buy. You had to pay postage and packing. Then you ordered your figures, and the more you ordered, the heavier they were. Then you had to go to your dad, not your mum, she didn't have a checkbook. You went to your dad, and you'd say to your dad, I need £8. And he would say, what that for? He said, it's all right, Dad, because I've got £8, which I've earned from my Saturday job, working. And he'd say, I don't waste the money back, I'll put it in there, somebody's not spending your money on trap, I'll tell soldiers, how old are you? Can I have a check? So buying soldiers from catalogues was hard work. But if you went to shops, generally speaking, they had historical figures. So once you got into fantasy like me, and like you would have done if you'd been in a fantasy wargamer in 1973, shops that sold fantasy figures were few and far between. So I tended to have 1s and 2s of a lot of things. I've got lots of goblins now, but at the start I had 2. And the earliest Dungeons and Dragons games we played in, even going 77, 78, when we had miniature figurines and we'd been collecting for 4 years, a lot of us were using card figures. You could buy, I can't remember the name of the company. Somebody tell me. Somebody out there will know. I used to get an A4 piece of card, and I used to have a lot of ants on it. Our early Dungeons and Dragons games, my games, we weren't fighting goblins. We were nearly always fighting ants, because someone had a card of ants, and you pushed them out, these little cards, and you put them in a stand. And you had a row of clerics and a row of wizards, and you chose dwarfs, and they were printed. Oh, that's the front of me, and then the back of the card was the back of his head. That was probably a bit later than this, but we had to, because we just didn't have the numbers. Nobody could afford it. But that meant that when we did use these figures, they became the creatures that we feared, even though nowadays you might look at them and go, oh, just for perspective, have a look at the size of my army of things that are bad. And you see, that, generally speaking, is my entire evil army. I did buy an elephant, and I did buy a Nazgul, and they were both mistakes because I couldn't glue them together. We didn't have super glue, we had araldite. And none of us seemed to be able to work out how araldite worked. 2 tubes, one was a heart, and you squeeze them onto something. You stirred them up with a matchstick until you got the consistency that was supposed to be perfect. And then you would smear them over the wings of your Nazgul. This smelly, horrible, tacky, gluey mess. Then you push the wings of your Nazgul on, and you'd prop it up with paint pots and pegs and bits of string. Then you'd pray for 3 hours, and then you'd try and remove all the tape, and then you'd put the Nazgul on the table like that, and its wings would go. Or some twit would come in, bash your Nazgul, and the wings would just fall off. And then the holes where the wings were supposed to fit was full of gunk, which you then had to scrape out with a knife because you couldn't get the gunk back out. So that, yeah, I did have a Nazgul. My favourite figure though from this time, I still use regularly in modern, and I'm not talking about retrospective, old school Dungeons and Dragons for old men. I'm talking about young, strong, virile, handsome chaps and chapesses who are all young and firm-buttocked. I still use this. You are saying, that's a man with a sheet thrown over his head. Are we playing Dungeons and Dragons or watching an episode of Scooby-Doo? And that would be my reaction. There he is. Oh, there's his pal. I've got two of them. They are Miniature Figurines, 1973, Barrow Wights for Lord of the Rings. It's almost like, no, I'm sorry, before 1977, 76, you do not exist. Your memories are irrelevant because you didn't play Dungeons and Dragons. There'll be people watching this video and they'll look at it and they'll go, that's not Dungeons and Dragons. I want to watch a video about early Dungeons and Dragons. What's he talking about? I'm talking about early Dungeons and Dragons. What there wasn't early Dungeons and Dragons. I've gone off on one, haven't I? I've had a rant. So they lent themselves more to fantasy role-play games, which is then what little groups of us did, my brother and I did, without really knowing what we were doing. We didn't have an aim. But I don't think Gary Gygax and his pals had an aim. I don't think they all sit down one day and go, woohoo, I don't. That was my entire force of things that were, by definition, naughty. That could have been more pithy. I do wish I scripted these things. So, I just felt you might like to see my old armies. I didn't always have this. And a final thought, I shall leave you with this. When I had to save up and really consider what I bought for the money I had, I think I might have appreciated it more than today. Do you think in the future, what I always promised myself I wouldn't do this. You know, when I were a lad. When I were a lad, things were better. Well, they weren't. They were rubbish. But that's the first thing. Secondly, I think old people always complain. I'm beginning to think we have something to complain about, which I didn't used to think. I just thought they were naughty, grumpy, moany, miserable. But that causes me to wonder, as a final thought, we've got a player in our Dungeons and Dragons Club. He's just 16. What is he going to be complaining about in 54 years' time? Can you imagine he was going to be sat there saying, I can't be doing with this. I like the old AI things we used to have when I was a kid. 3D printing, that was the way forward. All this modern stuff's doing my head in. Why can't they use AI and 3D print like we used to do? It's an outrage, he'll say. And you know what? In many ways, he will be absolutely right. I've got to put my glasses down. Ta-ra, Chuck!